Welcome to Harbinger's flagship interactive webinar, Power Hour. Select the right speaker for audio output. Test your speaker from audio settings. If necessary, join the webinar using your phone. Use the Q&A panel to share your questions. This webinar is being recorded. Attendees will receive the recording. Let's tune in.
Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. My name is Vikal and I'm the moderator for today's exciting event. I would firstly like to thank you for taking time out to attend this PowerPack webinar focused on digital publishing hosted by Harbinger. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to inform you that Power Hour is a series of interactive roundtable discussions hosted by Harbinger, where industry stalwarts share their experience and insights on a particular topic. The topic for today's discussion is content modernization with AI and what digital content publisher must do next. As the topic has it, we will be today throwing some light on not just survival, but thriving and on how digital publishers are planning the way forward. With that, it's time for me to introduce our host for today's roundtable. It's Shrikant Patadil. Shrikant is Chief Technology Officer at Harbinger and has been with Harbinger for more than 25 years. During his tenure, he has led offshore software development and sales team and marketing team at various capabilities. For customers and his team, Shrikant has been a source of cutting edge knowledge of shifting technology landscape. Shrikant, I'll hand it over to you. The stage is all yours.
Hey, thanks, Vikalp, for that introduction to the topic and also introducing me. Uh, Saved me some time for sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate. Uh, a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. It's a very interesting topic, as Vikalp mentioned. We have come across. It's not just like we've been talking about this over the years, but with the advent of AI, the whole perspective about content is changing. So content earlier used to be mostly thought from a creative lens, but now there is a very strong engineering uh, perspective towards how you think about content. So so it's like for both the creative people as for the engineering people, it's an interesting time in terms of how to think about some of these problems like content modernization, doing that at scale, and so forth. So it's my pleasure to bring this discussion to you along with my fellow panelists. Let me give you a quick overview of how we have planned this session so that you get an idea of the things that we're going to talk about. How it's not limited to this, we could go in other areas as well as the discussion develops. But a few of the things that we will touch upon today is because of AI, does content modernization not become like a one-off every 2 to 3 years sort of a task, but it's like a continuous sort of process? And does AI help us to do that at scale and do that in a continuous form? Because it's now probably more practical and easier to do it than earlier. And also the demand in terms of user expectations is also changing. Therefore, overall, how you visualize or think about content in an intelligent, reusable form so that you can do this in a continuous way. So we'll touch upon those aspects. Um, However, I talked about, the whole human aspect to it, the creative element. And I think that also is something that we need to look at and make sure that it doesn't become just an engineering problem, but the creative elements of bringing in the best out of a content or instructional design or whatever it may be to get that output in terms of retention of knowledge or personalization or productivity or capability development. We whatever is the intent, I think we make sure it's done in a creative way. And finally, because of AI, there's a lot of questions about how do we govern this whole process of content creation, modernization, manage things efficiently, how to make this whole thing trustworthy and make it as, there is a creative element, but also there is a deterministic element within which you want to operate and want the AI to be used. So how some of those things can be enabled through good governance and guardrails. So see, these are some of the things that we will touch upon, and I'll post some questions to our panelists, and I'm pretty sure based on their expertise, they'll be able to share great insights and examples, and also frameworks, how you should think about some of these problems. Whether you are a digital publisher or an enterprise, internal organization building and consuming and creating a lot of content for learning and training purposes. Now, before I delve in, let me just give you a couple of perspectives. So again, we talked about content from a two lens, from the creative lens and from the engineering lens. However, when we think about modernization today, it is not just about the content. It is probably the whole ecosystem that one needs to think about. It is the platform, the content itself, the skills that you're going to transform basis of this, then how the performance happens, compliance. So all of these aspects, like it's an entire talent transformation problem, probably not just a content modernization problem. So that's what I wanted to probably leave a thought on. So from as leaders, we see many transformation problems not just becoming a problem statements for just the content team, but it is for the organization or for the entire, workforce ecosystem to think about. And various components also need to work efficiently. Otherwise, the outcomes probably may not be enabled. So we'll talk about some of these things as we go through. And one example, out there is what we feel is there will be new ways of delivering content. And one example is how Coursera and ChatGPT have integrated. So now you can take a Coursera course within ChatGPT, and you can use the power of LLM to kind of, as you're experiencing the course, also to ask questions and get responses, and uh, you know uh, it- create your own personalized paths, which earlier may have taken a lot of time and effort to do. And it again gives this may be a very simple way of doing things, but of course, in based on your compliance requirements, or leadership coaching requirements, there are new modalities in which things can be assembled and delivered. So just wanted to give that example as there before we begin our conversation today. And now it's probably the best time for me to bring in our panelist. Starting with Nicholas Igneri, founder and CEO of Innovations Learning Ventures. Hi, Nick. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi.
If
Hi.
you
Thank
can
you.
briefly introduce yourself and also share, this why is this topic close to your heart?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Nicholas Igneri. I'm the founder of Innovative Learning Ventures. So what we do as an organization is really what the webinar is about. We help L&D functions, content developers, we can modernize their processes and their function. So I think it's really important. When I was asked to participate in this, I was really excited because I think this is such an important topic for content publishers or L&D functions, right? Um, we've been through, in my work, I sense a lot of anxiety in this space when I work with my clients about, using AI to modernize their L&D function or their content publishing functions. And it's really no different than what we've been through in the past, right? We moved from classroom training to e-learning. We moved from e-learning to virtual learning. We developed blended models. These all require new technologies, new processes, new ways of thinking, new ways of developing content. And really, AI is no different. It is going to transform. It's just another tool to help transform and modernize our processes. Um, so I'm excited to talk about what I've learned in this process and how I can help you think about this differently.
Hey, thanks, Nick. And yeah, looking forward to deeper insights from you in terms of your experiences, probably very relevant to the topic. And you said the organization also is solving similar problems. So I
Mhm.
think it'll be very interesting to hear your views. Let me
Mhm.
now welcome Dale Walden, Vice President and Product Management, Madcap Software. Hello, Dale. Thanks for joining us. If you can briefly introduce yourself and also share what makes you interested in this particular topic.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm VP Product Management, as was said, at Madcap Software. My background is largely in software development and engineering department. So I tend to take a technical view of a lot of these themes. If I imagine some of the people here are familiar with Xyleme in the learning space. I've been with Xyleme for many years. And so working with that data there has always interested me in terms of uh, how this source content gets turned into something valuable, because when we're working with the content, it seems very code based, but it gets translated into something far more valuable downstream from that. And machine learning in particular has done this thing where it's forced us to reckon with probability in our daily lives in a way that we haven't needed to before. And it's, in my mind, it feels like the kind of clash between classical or relativistic physics and the quantum world, that clash that's still going on. We are now struggling with the same clash, just with the tools we use every day. And that's pretty fascinating to me. It doesn't mean that anything new has actually happened. It's just that we are seeing things differently and we have different tools available to explore that. And so that's both fascinating to me. And it's also somewhat terrifying. And so I think it's important to engage with that. And applying that lens to content creation has been really, really interesting, to see how things have to change in both how we look at content, what it is, and the value it provides, and then also how we're building it and how we're getting it out to the world. All of those things have been challenged in the last couple of years, and I just find it very interesting, and it's a privilege to be alive at this point where everything is changing so quickly. So yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dale. And very rarely we have like a technologist on this on our panel. So I think thanks for joining us. And I think I'm sure your views and perspectives towards how content modernization should be looked at and the challenges and the scope of doing things will be very valuable. So looking forward to that. Now let me bring in my colleague Poonam Jaipuria, Vice President e-learning. She's an industry pro in e-learning. Poonam, if you can briefly introduce yourself and also share, why is this topic close to your heart?
Sure, Shrikant. Thank you for the intro and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the panel today with Nick and Dale here. So quickly about myself, I have over 2 decades of experience, mostly working with digital publishers, associations, and enterprises to help them through some significant industry shifts. Personally, I am a big believer in having the right blend of technology and learning science to handle content, and especially when it comes to scale. And this topic was very close to my heart, and that's exciting. So I believe that the traditional content modernization models have been breaking now, especially last couple of years. We are seeing, like, when I'm talking to some of the digital publishers, I'm seeing that there was a time when they used to talk in terms of how frequently or how many years would they be changing or updating the content, to now when they're saying how the content is continuously evolving, especially which is being driven by AI regulations and the changing learner expectations. So a lot of digital publishers today are facing are no more having this question like how do we update, but how do we make the content continuously adaptable to the industry or to the learners. So the publishers basically need to start rethinking modernization, not as a project anymore, but as an operating model. And that's what excites me for this topic today.
Hey, thanks, Poonam. I think that's an interesting perspective of, and that probably leads to my first question about how should you think about modernization. Earlier, there was this thing about just being focused on the design upgrade or catalog upgrade and so forth. So let me ask Nick that question. How do you think that content modernization itself is changing? And do people think that it's still design upgrade or it's like much more than that?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think it's much more than that. I think when I work with clients about modernization, where we start, 'cause I think I had a slide here, where we start is really dependent on the maturity level of the organization, where they are. I mean, Poonam just talked about, adaptability, and I think that's, further down the readiness cycle. But depending where you are and what your organization is doing, I would suggest starting at modernizing your content and your operations. If you're earlier on and you want to experiment with building content and rebuilding your workflows to see where, instructional design comes into the process, how you create content, it's going to vary greatly depending on what type of organization you're building content for, what or type of organization you are, regulatory environment's much more restrictive. So I would start with content, with your content modernization process. And I think the key here, both on content and operations, is to experiment. If you're early in the process, you have to just experiment with different tools and see what works for your organization. I wouldn't jump right into technology if you're earlier on in the adoption cycle. I would start with content and operations, look at your workflows. If you don't have workflows, create workflows, look how you currently do work, and then think about what tools and techniques you can use to modernize that process. There are many tools. I'm experimenting a lot with Google Notebook LM. I think it's fascinating that I could put some source content in there and it can then spit out things like slides, flashcards, handouts. It could create a short video of my course. It's really fascinating, what it could do. So I would start with content operations, experiment with tools, and then begin to redesign your workflows. Once you have that down, I would look at skill gap assessment, how we assess skills. It's really core to what content we're building, right? I'll talk about that a little bit more later in the webinar, but I think this is an often missed but very important part of the modernization process. Are we using old competency, how we develop competency frameworks for roles? Are we using an old model? And what is a newer way to look at that? Then selecting the right technology and creating the right governance structures to support your work is critically important. So these are the 4 points I look at. Where we start with an organization really depends on their maturity level.
Hey, thanks, Nick. I think this is a well put together, like a simple framework. And I think if you're going into a modernization exercise specifically with AI, it makes sense to go once you explain. It makes a lot of sense. So, one additional question I had for you is because most of these guys are also, catalog companies, right?
Mhm.
So, of course, from that perspective, do you think like, the the volume of the catalog or the size of the catalog has anything to do with the decision making in the modernization phase also? Like you want to start.
Well, what I could say about that is I worked for many years for a large content publisher, and it's just inherent in those types of organizations, the issue of modernization and updating. When you have hundreds of courses, and you have to keep them up to date. Yet the environment is shifting, right? Roles are shifting. The way what skills and competencies are needed for roles are constantly changing. In fact, I read an article recently that skill decay is like 6 months now, right? So,
Mm.
jobs are constantly shifting and changing, and large publishing organizations need to continuously update their content. So those organizations may have a large library. So maybe their work in modernization isn't in the generation of content, but it's
Mm.
experimenting in the update of that content, the efficient update of that content, and building work, selecting tools and building workflows to streamline that process and make it easier and quicker.
Makes sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
thanks for sharing that perspective as far as catalogs are concerned and how they should
Mhm.
approach. Um, uh, Dale, let me bring you into this discussion, and from your perspective and from as technologists, how are you thinking about redefining modernization from if you are an end customer, whether you are a publisher or an enterprise, and how to take that beyond the design, just the design and the UI UX part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nicholas talked about the processes and the steps you need to take to modernize. And I think there's something else you need to think about as well, which is the content itself. What does
Mm.
it mean and what is it doing? And so in product management, there is a thought framework called jobs to be done, and I tend to use that when thinking about problems like this. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a framework that allows you to find what is actually trying to be completed, what's the actual goal. And the anecdote is a person doesn't go to a hardware store to buy a hammer and a nail. They want to have their picture up on the wall. Getting the
Mm.
picture up on the wall is the job to be done, not the act of buying a hammer and a nail and hammering it. So if you take that framing with your content, modernization of content actually seems like the technology that's available to us today is forcing us to refocus on what's important about the content. And when we think about content, we tend to think about a package, the formatting, the presentation, the engagement, all of that is part of the content. But the truth is that's not the valuable part. That's a means to an end. The valuable part is the thing that the content is communicating. And
Mm.
these new technologies have forced us to kind of recognize that we get wrapped up in the particulars of the current tools that we're using, and we lose sight of the valuable thing that we're trying to actually complete. And because AI is shaking that up, it is a good opportunity for us to refocus on that value specifically. So that value to me is the knowledge and how do we reinforce the knowledge that's supposed to be conveyed, as well as the context around that knowledge. And so modernizing your content means reconciling the fact that your audience is different now. Your audience has shifted from just being a set of people to also a set of systems, and those systems have their own requirements. So as far upstream as is possible, how are you planning for that end goal? Because as Nick said, I don't remember the term he used, but skill atrophy is something like 6 months now.
Mm.
That is extremely fast, which means that you have to be planning very far upstream for your content to be updatable and adaptable. And the way that you do that is to take advantage of these new technologies, but that means that you have to be creating the content in a way that is able to transfer that knowledge to those technologies so they can adapt for you. So I think it's about refocusing on the basics in some way, but then also challenging your assumptions about what you're trying to complete when you create content, and maybe setting aside the presentational layers. The formatting is transient, but the knowledge and the context is foundational and indispensable. And are you putting the right focus on that as far upstream as possible? And I think for a lot of us, the answer would be no, because it's not how our daily life has been working. And that, like I said, is now being challenged. So that's another thing that I think you need to address and to think about is the value of what you're doing.
Thanks, Dale. I think that's I think, yeah, Nick touched upon the process side and you touched upon the core content itself, like how to make it in such a way or think about it in a different way so that it's adaptable to the whole ecosystem and it solves the actual learning or the knowledge, retention problem that you're trying to solve and make
Right.
it uh, So that makes a lot of sense. But on that context, let me bring Poonam in. Poonam, your perspective on, I know you've handled a lot of content modernization projects before. Now, what's your outlook today in terms of with AI?
Yes. So, like you rightly said, Shrikant, and I've kind of led or managed large modernization projects for almost 8 to 9 years now. The biggest difference I see personally is it's now no longer about content redesign, but it's more about content re-engineering. That's how I have been share talking with my customers. So for years earlier, modernization was about refreshing visuals, migrating platforms or tools. But I think AI has changed quite a bit of that because content is very easy to create or, and making it very commoditized, in fact, for that matter. So the real value is not how quickly you can create content or how your content looks, but how it behaves inside a given system. And the Coursera example you just shared was an interesting one where course is coming to me at the point of work rather than me going to an LMS and having that course. So recently, we actually worked for a large digital publisher. In fact, they were implementing Xylem and we were helping them with it. So they had like over 5,000 odd course titles, which in SCOM packages. Um, in the earlier world, what we would have probably done is just a lift and shift from one platform to other. But with an LCMS and the way we need to make the content open available for AI, we actually broke those courses into structured modules and reusable content blocks so that they can be more searchable, easy to update, available as needed in different formats, published in various ways. So basically, what we are seeing as a shift is not just a design, but it's an entire life cycle of how you create and manage and update content over a period. So, at a very high level, I would say that the modernization of the way I look at it is in three layers. The top layer or the first one is a experience layer, which is what the learners see. Of course, it matters even today, and but it's not just the differentiator anymore. The second layer is a structural modernization, which is like how do you really think about your course? Instead of one SCOM package, it's almost now thinking in terms of components, so that it can be your content can be more modular, tagged easily, reusable in various formats, can be clubbed to create different learning journeys based on learners' persona and preferences. And the third and the most important is the system in which your content is stored, which is where most publishers or most organizations are struggling today, because that's where the content is actually governed, updated, made it AI ready, and so on. So those are the three layers of modernization, I would say. So basically, what I'm saying is now the modernization is no more about just a redesign, but it's actually an engineering, a system in which the content has its life.
Thanks, Poonam. I think you covered a lot of points, and that was also example of, not just looking at uh, content transformation as just from an upgrade perspective, but also reimagining, introducing a new system like an LCMS, breaking the content into chunks so that's readily consumable by AI. And yeah, I think entirely looking at it from an engineering perspective also. So, so I think, yeah, we heard three different, one is how, where to start and how to go about the process. The second, Dale, you covered, of course, the whole looking at the content itself and what it's trying to deliver, and the job to be done at the core. And then finally we, Poonam, you touched upon the whole in looking at it like an engineering problem also, and solving it from and reimagining things at from entirety. So makes a lot of sense. So that brings us to the next point, which maybe Dale, I'll probably start with you. From a structural perspective, and Poonam covered some of these aspects of, it's like not a just one aspect of the things, but many aspects that need to change. So from your perspective and your lens, what all things need to change if we have to do modernization at scale and continuously and ongoingly? How?
Yeah. So scale is often the problem that successful teams run into, which is a good problem to run into, but usually the things that help deal with the scale problem are structure and predictability upstream. And so content that is created just kind of WYSIWYG or as a blob is very difficult to scale for obvious reasons. The same thing that Poonam mentioned with this content publisher, they had all of these SCORM courses. Those are basically a blob. And in order for that to properly scale and be able to meet the new requirements, they actually had to break that out. They had to content frack it and turn it into something reusable. So not having to do that and starting with that upstream is a good way to prevent it. So starting with your content being both well-defined, so structured, even something as simple as Markdown is structured, even though it's very loose, it still has very clear structure to it, and it's easy for a system to understand. So making sure that your content is structured in some sort of markup language, whether it be Markdown, whether it be HTML, is also better than nothing, XML, anything like that. And then that it's well described. So the thing outside of structure that can really help downstream systems, and these systems are not just AI systems, even systems that you want to use to transform your content into an experience layer for a person that is not AI, these systems thrive on these things as well. So well-defined and well-described. Described is adding the context to that content upstream or wherever is relevant. So think applying taxonomy to your content, tags, ensuring that context is explicit on your content. There is a habit that we have as humans to pick up on inferred context and act on it as if it was explicit. So inferred context would be, for example, the folder structure of files. That is inferred context. You may be able to know that a document is talking about a certain thing because it's in this folder structure or it's meant for a certain audience or something like that. Having that content not be inferred, but instead be explicit can be very valuable to these machine learning systems downstream because they're going to make better decisions when they are generating new experiences for your users downstream. So well-defined content and well-described content. If you do those two things, scalability is much, much easier. And ensuring that what you're putting upstream is the actual valuable thing, that you're not worrying so much about formatting transient things, have that be added as you get further along in the content cycle. Publishing system can add those experiences for you. You don't need to do it when you're focusing specifically on the meat of the knowledge you're trying to convey. So structuring that and describing that, those two things can really help your effectiveness in your entire content lifecycle.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. That makes a lot of sense of thinking in a very structured and or just a question, are you doing that with any particular organization currently, or your platform is helping to do that? Any specific thoughts there?
Yeah, so at Madcap, there are a number of content authoring systems. There's Flare, there's Ixia's CCMS, and there's Silent Create. All three of those are structured authoring systems. So naturally, all the systems on the Madcap platform do that. But I do mean it that it can be as simple as Markdown, which has structure built directly into it, but has implied formatting that you don't actually have to worry about. So doing something as simple as that is important. But yeah, the Madcap platform, the entire thing is structured and has taxonomy built in, but there are a number of other systems. Contentful allows you to create a sort of structure because you have control over what the content schema is, but you're in more control of that, so you have to be more disciplined about it. But there are a number of systems that do that. So any organization that uses our tools just gets that for free because that's how it's built into the system, but you can ensure that you're creating structure through your own discipline as well.
Okay, yeah. So of course, using a software makes it much more easier to manage and scale, but you could do it with simple Markdown as well. So that's a great point. So it makes sense. Let me bring Nick in. Nick, your perspective on how to do modernization at scale and what kind of structural changes do you think L&D will do?
Yeah, what's been interesting in my work is the structural problem that I see popping up is really how we define the update, how we define the content we're going to create. And, when we think about how we build a course and what goes into it, I think it's built on an old model. And what do I mean by that? Like the old model of developing content is looking at what skills do our people have today versus what the role requires, right?
Mhm.
So it's like looking at what do people have currently and what is the role required. But as we know, those who've worked in organizations, a lot of those role descriptions, they're not updated that often, right? The
Mm.
competency models are static. They're not looked at frequently, right? And they're very internally focused. We're looking at the organization. Not that there's anything wrong with that because the organization has goals, but they're purely internally focused. And then when you get to evaluating those skills in annual performance appraisals, people are kind of self-assessing themselves, or managers are assessing them. And do the managers have the skills, the required skills of the future to be assessing competency? So I think we need to start asking a different question when we think about what goes into courses and how those courses are updated. And that question is more based in what skills will this role require in 6, 12, 18 months, given the AI trajectory, right? Where are the gaps between the future state and the current state, right? This is a much more forward-looking framework to
Mm.
decide what goes in courses, right? Creating more dynamic skill graphs instead of static competency models. Like the relationship between skills assigned to a role are more important now than ever, right? So when you look at clustering skills for certain roles, it's much more important than it was in the past. And then what I'm urging my clients to look at is competitive analysis. We do competitive analysis to look at how our products differ from different organizations, but what is the competitive analysis on talent? What
Mm.
are organizations of our size in our industry looking for in a particular role? Say a marketing manager, for instance. Why is what I'm looking for vastly different than what my competitor is looking for, if it is, but let's just say it is. What are they doing? How is that going to impact, our competitiveness with that organization if they're looking for totally different talent in very similar roles that I'm looking for? So there are ways, to scrape LinkedIn posts and bring in that data pretty
Mm.
easily and look at how are these roles as they're designed in my organization, how are they competing with similar types of organizations? And then really moving towards a behavioral based approach, really observing people, what they're doing in their role, what tools are they using, how proficient they are at the tools, what prompts are they using, what workflows are they developing, where are the gaps in those workflows. So, I'm much more of a proponent of dissecting your current way of deciding what goes in a course, right? And saying, how can we do that different? How can we make that more forward looking? Because if whether we're building courses internally for our staff or whether we're selling courses to organizations, that's going to be a very important question moving forward and a competitive and a competitive advantage
Mm.
for large content publishers, right? Because if my courses are really forward thinking and really looking at skills 6, 12, 18 months out, that's a lot more sellable than, looking at current static models. So I would really focus that's one of the structural things that I think are really important is we can generate and recreate content using AI and in a much more streamlined way, but we really need to take a step back and say, what are we putting in there and how are we making those decisions?
Makes sense. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective that you look at, competitive, um, you know, I don't know how much today when courses are kind of built, the competitive intelligence is kind of thought about and leveraged to build it. And of course, this whole skills being at the center of uh, how you design content and and so that it's scalable and you can it actually is talking to a particular transformation related to a skill. is I think those are important
Right, I think
perspectives.
having a continuous loop there of continuously scanning and continuously updating is really important. I mean, one of my past roles working in the university space, and this is a big problem for schools, right? Are we teaching the right skills for I mean, they were really focusing on the current situation, not the future situation. So I think that, thinking about your content modernization cycle along with your skill assessment cycle is critical. Those two things have to work together.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me now bring it Poonam in quickly on this point. Poonam, from your experience perspective, what would be your advice to if you have to do modernization at scale and think about the structural changes that will be effective to do that?
Absolutely, Shrikant. So, I have seen three primary structural changes which matter the most. The first one is where you start thinking about content as an infrastructure and not just a course to be delivered. The second is the roles which are evolving in the L&D team. And the third is instead of thinking about tools, start thinking about systems. So I'll elaborate on all three, but those are my three structural changes I would recommend. So the first one, like I said, where the content becomes an infrastructure because now you're not thinking just in number of courses, but you're almost thinking about it like a product where it has its own life cycle, you're versioning it, you're designing it for reusability, and in fact, even sunsetting it at times. Like Nick said, if every 6 months the skills are decaying, you may also need a sunset logic for some of your content. So, just to give you an example, it actually means a complete mindset change. So,
Mm,
for one of our customer, when we did a major migration of their content to a system, what we realized was the content was a lot of it was duplicate, a lot of things were being used in different formats, and they were being used as standalone assets. So when we actually migrated it to a platform, we designed it as reusable building blocks, and then we reassembled those blocks into the content formats, because of which they were able to publish those courses into PowerPoints, RISE modules, reference guides, performance assets. And we realized there was almost 32% content which could be reused across various formats. So it's a complete structural shift in how you think and how you deploy these courses. Like I said, one other important change we are seeing is the roles are evolving. So the instructional designers are now becoming experience architects, as we call them. SMEs are becoming people who validate rather than write content. QA is now becoming into AI governance and audits,
mm,
readiness checkers. So these are new roles which are emerging into the L&D space, and these are all about intelligence of content, content intelligence rather than doing it all from scratch by hand. So really, we are not talking about replacing people, but it's really about repositioning them where human
mm,
can add a lot more value through their judgment rather than just creating it. So that's the second one. And the third, like I said, is the L&D is thinking more than tools at a system level now. So they need to think of designing content, not just for the learners, but also they need to start thinking about how do I repurpose this in various formats? What analytics should I have and what analytics engine would need to interpret learner signals? What are some adaptive platforms in which I can deliver personalized experiences? So these are questions which we never thought of as L&D, which we should start thinking. And
mm.
so basically the L&D now needs to design content not just for learners or humans, but also for machines. So that's another example of how L&D structure and the way they will think is changing. So I think like Nick talked about the whole operations, the content operations layer, that's a completely new way of looking at content where modernization, governance, AI enablement, performance support all come together and they bring a completely new experience of delivering content. So that's how my suggestions to the L&D team.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, Poonam. Thanks for sharing that and breaking that into those three different perspectives. On that note, let me also, ask you very quickly about your perspective on um, you know guardrails and governance, because we're trying to use AI to in the whole modernization strategy. So what's your thought on um, the governance and guardrails piece? Because that worries quite many people.
And that's for me, Shrikant.
Yeah.
All right. So again, what we are starting to see is there's clearly a split between content that can be generated and the content that is more deterministic, like you know what it will be produced. So especially with compliance, safety, regulatory industries, having a very clear deterministic output of having content which can be traced and validated is very critical. So there are three guardrails I would suggest, which really we should look at. The first is the content health. Like, is the content really outdated? Is it fragmented? Is it correct for that matter? Because AI is not going to go and fix what you already have incorrectly done, right? In fact, it will amplify that problem as you take it for scale. The second is like I think what Dale talked about is the whole making the context explicit because AI won't know it unless you say it. And the third and the most important guardrail is deterministic, especially when the content is at high risk. So, high risk environments like compliance, safety, regulatory content, you need to be make sure that your content is very clear. There is a human in the loop which is validating every bit of it. And not just that, there's also a trail of who did what and which models did you use and so on. So there is a very clear, explainable AI implemented which can tell you from where is this content coming from. So those are my suggestions. So don't skip governance, but actually make it a part of your day-to-day processes is what I would recommend.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Poonam, in terms of thinking about governance. Usually, content and teams probably left it to the technology people to think about it. And but now I think with AI and when you're repurposing content building, I think it becomes important for the content teams also to think. And in the previous thing you also alluded to the roles that is changing. Maybe there are new roles that are around governance and guardrails also that teams need to have. uh, Nick, I know I'll probably go to Dale because he's the most technical person on this topic last, but
Mm.
starting from your perspective, how do you look at the whole guardrails and governance?
Yeah, I'll be quick on this and give Dan more time to dig into it. But yeah, some of this depends if you're again internally focused or commercially focused. Me being in the commercially focused space for a while, a lot of the governance topics were actually structured in our service level agreements or SLAs. So if you are commercially focused and you have SLAs, a lot of your governance pieces may be already set. But I also think it's important if you don't have a governance structure in L&D to do that and really focus on three things to start with. If you're new, one is your technology and your data, right? Data use, data security, data privacy. If you're selling content, it's going to be a big question from those purchasing it and how you deal with data security, data management. The other is content development. Those who buy content want to know like what's your update cycle, what's your content life cycle, how do you manage your IP, right? So if I'm buying the content, am I protected around IP management and IP rights? What's your QA process? How can I use your branding, accessibility standards, naming conventions, things of that nature all need to be in your content SL, in your content governance structure. And then lastly, your operation structure. So it's tech, data, content, operations. And then in your operations, like what is your registration process? What learning platforms do they go into to register? Again, that kind of overlaps into data security, and how do you manage your vendors? So I would start in those three areas if you don't have a governance structure, tech data, content, and your operations.
Makes sense. So covering those four perspectives is
Mhm.
I think probably gives us a good starting point to many organizations if they're still figuring out how to think about this.
Mhm.
So thanks, Nick, for sharing that. Dale, I think you probably build and use a lot of these things, and you are probably the go-to person for me for for advice on this. What's your kind of recommendations or tips that when it comes to guardrails and governance, and while we are leveraging AI quite aggressively in this whole content modernization, what are your thoughts?
I I think both Poonam and Nick brought up very important points that shouldn't be overlooked. One is to be explicit about context,
Mm.
as I already mentioned, because that's actually going to really help you with your governance. And I'll touch on that more in just a second. But then also, as Nicholas also said, don't overlook the governance you already have available to you, right? If you already have SLAs that have that governance defined,
Mm.
then apply those that governance to your workflows that include AI. Don't let AI leapfrog your current quality control. That's a very important statement. If you don't have anywhere to start and you don't have any real understanding of what AI governance can look like, there are existing resources that you can look at. Um, Put them up on screen here if you're able to, Shrikant. But these are just a few. There are lots, especially European focused ones. But the OECD has a set of guidelines and principles just for in general AI. So it's a comprehensive set of principles on how to properly and ethically implement AI. So you can look at those. There's also something at MadCap that we adhere to, which is the US government's NIST risk management framework. So for any AI tools that we implement, we actually put that risk framework to the test against those AI tools, which is very important for us. We have to deal with regulated content a lot, so that's actually a very important resource for us. There's also an ISO spec for it. It's very, very comprehensive and it's very dense, but any of these you can look at. You can start to get ideas on how you can actually formulate a more practical governance framework for implementing AI in your own organization. And if you move forward one more slide, these are some more, boiled down ideas that we can get to. Similar to what Poonam said, there are basically three stages that I think are very important for implementing AI tools. One is where you would start, which is experimentation. As was mentioned, don't overlook experimentation, but do what you can to guide that experimentation because your teams are going to want to experiment. So make sure you give them guardrails for that experimentation. Make sure that you introduce explicitly approved use cases and then explicitly restricted use cases. Here are the things that you can use AI tools for and that you cannot use AI tools for. Make sure you provide a guidance for what tools that should be used. Try to avoid shadow use of tools. So if ChatGPT is not something you want your teams to be using, give them an alternative that is approved and tell them specifically not to use ChatGPT. And then also human in the loop for everything in the beginning. Just as Poonam said, you want a human to be in between the AI tool and whatever your end goal is in every single aspect while you're experimenting. And then identify what has been AI assisted. So that's that explicit context. Part of the context is, did this come along with AI help or was it fully generated from AI? Mark that in that content's metadata so that you know how to deal with it later. You can track effectiveness, but you can also track failures. You can know what is going to be high risk and is capable of handling that risk versus what's not. So I think the experimentation phase is very, very important. But then you can move to just adopting in a controlled manner and making sure that you have approved workflows. And Nick mentioned this. But what's very important is to prevent drift. You have these ideas of workflows. Try to make sure that you are actually making them official. Make sure you have quality gates in there. Make sure that you, this is actually very important, assign clear ownership to those workflows. So people who are responsible for different aspects of those workflows from a business value level, somebody who's responsible for the business success of that workflow, to the technical aspects of that workflow, somebody who is responsible for making sure that the tools are working the way that they're supposed to. And I think, Nick, you mentioned this as well. Treat these things as if they are official assets. Version them. The AI prompts that you're using, version them. Treat them like templates. Treat them like you would any other authoring template that you've ever used. Version them, templatize them, make them actually assets that are approved to work with and understood that they are actually valuable. And then finally, make it all systematic. Don't leave it to be manual. Make it all part of your actual automated governance systems. and then do things. I'm sorry, I don't remember if it was Poonam or Nick who mentioned, but maintain a registry of what the use cases are, of when they're being used. Make sure that remains up to date so you can audit and then automatically log any AI activity. Log what was input to the AI, log the prompt, log what came out of it, log who used it. Make sure that you have logs of those things. It's very, very important, not just for auditing, but just for understanding, are you being successful with this initiative that you put forward? So those are some practical steps and stages that you can go and you can apply to either an entire team or a subset of tools that you want to evaluate. But it's just very important to not leapfrog governance in your organization for a number of reasons. One of them would be that you won't know if you're actually being successful if you leapfrog these things. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, thanks, Dale, for, I've probably been on many panel discussions. We've talked about this topic, but it's a good format to think about, if you don't have where you can start and, from experimentation to governance, how do you take it? And of course, the perspectives that Poonam and Nick also shared about using the human perspective also, as well as, thinking about already using some of these SLAs and stuff like that you already have. Don't forget about that when you go ahead and move to AI. So it's definitely good advice and a good set of recommendations. So on that note, we come to an end to our sessions, and I think we covered a lot of topics, and I think some good examples of how to rethink about modernization as an ongoing challenge and break it down into both from a creative and an engineering problem. Look at the core concept of what you're trying to do, how where you need to start, and based on the maturity of your organization, how you want to go about things. So it's a much bigger undertaking than just like thinking of it as a one-off project that you'll attempt every 3 years or 4 years, but it's now has to be an ongoing thing. And AI definitely, like we said, scales learning, but some of you touched upon the human angle as well, saying that redefined roles or probably introduce them in loop in the process in such a way that it enhances the overall content that you're building and the training that you're trying to deliver. And finally, we talked about governance at length, and I think that's very, very important. And I think if you don't get that part right, then you can build something very cool and nice, but probably it'll have to be junked if it fails the guardrails and governance. So yeah, we are at an interesting cusp, and the whole view about content is changing, and there's a lot of possibilities, and I think we covered some aspects of how to approach it, and I'm glad that all of you shared the perspectives. Of course, different perspectives, business, actual practical examples coming from platform technology and so forth. So I think we covered a lot. So thank you for that. Let me now hand it over to Vikalp to close it. Over to you, Vikalp.
Hey, thank you very much, Shrikant. Well, this was a very insightful session. Before we move on to the questions posted by our attendees, I'd like to share with our viewers that Harbinger partners with organizations in the people business, helping them innovate in learning, talent, and employee experience. With 35 years of experience in learning and development, Harbinger builds products and solutions that transform how people work and learn. With that, let me just take a few questions posted by audience. This one is for Nick. What's one mistake you see publishers make when they try to modernize content design without changing the underlying process? Yeah, Nick, it's for you.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think change management is really a key point and a key part of AI, moving up an AI maturity level. And I think without the right change management processes and actually changing workflows, changing technologies, changing everything involved, is that it won't sustain itself. It will be something that the organization does for a little bit, but then it won't be adopted within the organization or within your function. So I think it's important to look at a bunch of things when thinking about AI readiness and AI adoption is your ability to implement change management processes, looking at the skills necessary for the team to be successful, looking at leadership. Does the leadership have the right impact on the function to support the adoption of these tools? Do you have the right tools and infrastructure? So AI readiness, AI effectiveness, AI maturity has a bunch of different domains to look at. And I think if you're not looking at all of them, your probability of success is diminished.
That's interesting. Thank you, Nick. Dale, I have one more for you. What does an AI-enabled content pipeline actually look like behind the scenes? Is it tools,
Mm.
workflows, or architecture?
So behind the scenes, an AI integration looks a lot like any other content integration that you would have in getting your content to any downstream service where you want it to be experienced. So you take, for example, you have a learning experience platform that doesn't host real content. It needs to be integrated with your content source, right? So it's very similar. The thing that's different, there are a couple of things that are different. One is the content needs to be successful for AI specifically. So what's going through the pipeline should be different. It should be more explicit, as we said. And you need to think about that upstream. But then the protocols that are used are often a little bit different as well. And sometimes there are some middlemen in between your end user experience and your content distribution area. So there are protocols like MCP, which are very specific for AI agents to be able to query a data source or a set of tools and understand how to use them. That's a middleware layer that doesn't exist for anything else. It's specifically for AI agents. So MCP is something that you can look at if you're trying to understand how do I integrate my chat system with my content source. MCP is a good candidate for that. There's also agent to agent, which I believe is a standard that's being sponsored by Google that's currently under development that does a very similar thing to MCP, but it's a protocol that allows agents to compose their capabilities together. So that's a protocol that doesn't exist for anything else, and it's very specific for AI. But in truth, it is all just getting data from one area to another area in your ecosystem. The thing that's different is what you're trying to get there and the specific protocols that you need to use. And so if you just educate yourself on those two things, you can successfully connect those pieces together.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave and Nick, for answering the questions. And thank you all the panelists for sharing your time and insights during this session. For all the unanswered questions, we'll be emailing you the responses to all the attendees. And with that, I once again thank you, Shrikant, and our panelists for this wonderful discussion. And I'm sure we are all going back with some food for thought for the today. And I would also like to thank our viewers for joining this session through Zoom. You have been an amazing audience. Thank you again. Take care and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.